Okay, so we're going to start chapter 7, where we are going to talk about proteins. This is our third macronutrient that we're going to cover, right? So we covered carbohydrates and we covered lipids, and now we're on to proteins. So as usual, there are a couple of slides of learning objectives. I will not read these to you. You hopefully by the end of the chapter can look back through that list and hopefully know what all of those are. So as an introduction, proteins total about 17% of our dry mass or body weight if water were removed. So they make up a large portion of our dry mass. Where do we find proteins? Throughout our bodies, throughout the cells, in every tissue of our body. Muscles are really high in proteins. Connective tissue, other organs, your heart, is a muscle, and it's made up of a lot of proteins. So again, throughout your body, in every single one of your cells, you will find proteins. Proteins are the functional units of our cells. What do? They contribute to growth, repair, and maintenance of our cells. They participate in transport. It could be transport into a cell or out of a cell, or transport of, for example, oxygen in our bloodstream. The protein hemoglobin is involved in that. So many proteins are involved in transport. Some proteins also act as enzymes, so they're going to control or mediate, speed up chemical reactions. Some are involved as hormones. There are proteins involved in helping to maintain fluid and electrolyte balance. We'll talk about those. Helping to maintain pH balance. We've got proteins that act as like buffers. Some proteins are involved in protecting against disease. So specifically, our immune system produces these things called antibodies. Those are proteins. And then lastly, I have on here serves as an energy source. Proteins can serve as an energy source. They can be converted into glucose in a process called gluconeogenesis. But using proteins as an energy source is not a really great thing. Our bodies try not to do that. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later in the chapter. Most people in industrialized countries like ours, we consume a diet that has enough protein. In fact, sometimes too much protein. Okay, so we do consume diets that are pretty rich in protein. However, many individuals in low-income countries do not. And not getting the appropriate amount of protein, so getting inadequate, lower than the RDA, lower than those amounts, can impair metabolic processes, can cause the body not to build the things that it needs. There's going to be more to come a little bit later in the chapter on inadequate protein intake. Okay, so let's jump into 7.1. And so in this first part of the chapter, we're going to talk about protein structure. So proteins are large, complex macromolecules. They're still, under microscopic, but they're considered to be these large, complex macromolecules. They're composed of these repeating subunits, which are called amino acids. Okay, and so a protein is literally a bunch of amino acids that have all been covalently bonded to each other, and the protein folds up in a very specific three-dimensional shape, and then the protein can do its job. Again, at the subunit level, proteins are made up of amino acids, just as complex carbohydrates were composed of sugars. It's the same idea here, this repeating units. Proteins are also the primary source of nitrogen in our bodies. And so when we look at protein composition, amino acid composition, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, just as we've seen in carbohydrates and in lipids. But there is a new atom that we haven't found in those, and that is going to be nitrogen. Okay, so again, proteins will be our primary source of nitrogen in our bodies. Some also contain sulfur, so that's another atom, another element that we haven't seen before. There are 20 different amino acids. So there's this pool of 20 different amino acids that are going to be used by our bodies to synthesize proteins. You can think of amino acids kind of like letters of the alphabet. They get put together, right, to form a variety of different proteins, just as letters of the alphabet would be put together to form a variety of different words. Okay. Okay. So amino acids that are needed to make proteins within our body are either going to be supplied by the food that we eat, and ultimately they're supplied by the food that we eat. They can also be synthesized by our cells, some of them. Okay. Again, our body needs this pool of 20 different amino acids in very specific levels in order to function. So what are good sources of protein, high protein foods? So tuna, 3 ounces of tuna, over 70% of the nutrient in tuna is going to come from protein. Okay, broiled chicken, beef, yogurt is a great source of protein. Let me come down here. Bananas, kind of low in protein. Pasta, it really depends on what kind. Now there's, pasta is made from quinoa and lentils and things that are actually high in protein. So it really depends on what kind. Eggs are pretty high in protein. Corn is lower. White rice is lower. So you can see that meats, poultry, fish, dairy products, those are going to be higher in protein than fruits and vegetables. Okay. Okay. What do amino acids look like? So we said that proteins are made up of amino acids. And so let's look at amino acid structure. So it doesn't matter which of the 20 amino acids that we're looking at, they're all going to have this basic, what we call backbone. And so if we look at this first figure where it says generic amino acid, this shows that backbone. So you can see that there's a carbon right here in the middle. We call this the central asymmetric carbon. That carbon in the middle will always be bonded to 4 different things. It will be bonded, where's my pointer? First to a hydrogen, second to what's called the amino group, which is a nitrogen that's attached covalently to 2 hydrogens. That's on one side, so that's the amino group. On the other side of that carbon is this group here, which is called the carboxyl group, which is also known as the acid group. So you can see the name amino acid comes from the fact that each of these have an amino group and what we call an acid group. Okay, specifically this is called the carboxyl or carboxylic acid group. And then what's here, the 4th position on this central carbon, this is what makes the 20 different amino acids different from each other. This is the only thing that's going to be different. This R is sometimes referred to as the side chain. Okay, so let me give you an example here. This is glycine, kind of the simplest amino acid. So you can see the backbone is the same, right? Amino group, central carbon, hydrogen, carboxylic acid group. What's here though, we don't have an R anymore, instead we have a hydrogen. So glycine's side chain is just a hydrogen. If I go to the second amino acid here, which is L-alanine, again, same thing, same basic backbone, but what's here, the side chain, instead of being a hydrogen, it's now what we call a methyl group. So it's a carbon attached to 3 hydrogens. Okay, I can go on and I can show you the other 20 different amino acids. I don't need you to remember what all of their side chains are, but what I do need you to know is that the side chains are different depending on which type of amino acid we're looking at. The commonality between all amino acids is that the backbone, amino, central carbon, acid group. Okay. Okay. So again, the body needs 20 of these different amino acids. That's kind of the pool in order to function properly. And I will mention this again later in the chapter, but there needs to be a specific amount of each of these 20 different amino acids. Essential amino acids, these are going to be the category of amino acids that your bodies cannot produce. And so these types, these essential amino acids, there's 9 of them, they must be obtained from our diet. Non-essential amino acids, on the other hand, they're still needed, they're still necessary, but your bodies can actually produce them. Okay, so 11 of the 20 can be made by our own bodies, 9 of them cannot be synthesized, and they have to be obtained from food. What does that list look like? Here they are. And again, I don't need you to memorize these. So for essential, again, these are the ones that the body cannot make. We've got histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. And then non-essential, again, our bodies can make them. We can get them from our diet, but our bodies can also synthesize them. Here are the 11. Okay, alanine, arginine, asparagine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamic acid, glutamine, glycine, proline, serine, and tyrosine. That's our list. So again, 20 different amino acids. Our body needs all of them. Some of them our body can produce on its own, and some of them have to be obtained from diet. There's then amino acids that are what we call conditionally essential. So what does this mean? These are non-essential amino acids that our body usually can produce on its own. However, they become essential amino acids during different phases of life or different conditions. So infancy, sometimes disease or trauma. Okay, so for example here, following trauma and infection, the amino acid glutamine and the amino acid arginine, which are both non-essential, they may be considered conditionally essential because when we supplement with them, recovery happens faster. Okay, so again, under certain conditions, even non-essential amino acids become essential. Again, because if we supplement or provide those amino acids, things happen faster. We recover faster. Okay, so we've got essential, non-essential, and conditionally essential amino acids. Okay. Let's talk about proteins and amino acid composition within different types of proteins. So we have what are called incomplete proteins and complete proteins. So let's define these. Incomplete proteins are going to be proteins that do not contain all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient amounts. Okay, so if you were eating a protein which was an incomplete protein, it was lacking 1 or more of these essential amino acids, didn't have sufficient amounts of all 9, we would consider that to be a low quality protein, not sufficient for growth and health. Most plant proteins fall into this category. Most plant proteins are incomplete proteins. There are exceptions, and I'll give you that list of exceptions, which are actually, they're listed down here under complete protein, sorry. So actually, we'll get to that, okay? So again, most plant proteins are going to be incomplete. There are a few exceptions that are complete, okay? So incomplete, they do not contain all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient amounts. This would be a low quality protein. Most plant proteins fall into this category. On the flip side, a complete protein does contain sufficient amounts of all 9 essential amino acids. That would be a high quality protein. Most, or all, I should say, animal proteins fall into that category. Okay, here's the exceptions. Here's the 3 plant proteins that are complete. Soybeans, buckwheat, and quinoa are all complete proteins. Okay, so very good choices for meatless, complete proteins, high quality proteins. Okay, so again, your cells, in order to function, are going to require this pool of essential amino acids so that our cells can produce proteins. Consuming incomplete protein sources, low quality protein sources alone cannot support the synthesis of body proteins. So if you're living on, for example, just rice, rice is a grain, Does it have protein? Sure, some level, but that all of the protein is going to be incomplete. And so living on a diet of just rice, you are not going to get all 9 essential amino acids. Okay? We will get into this in a little bit, but there, if you complement, if you're eating different incomplete low quality proteins that complement each other, then you can make up for that. There's if one lacks a certain essential amino acid, the other one has it, well then now you're complementing. Okay, so that's better. We're going to get into that in a little bit. So again, the essential amino acid that's in the smallest supply in whatever food that you're eating is going to be called the limiting amino acid. This is going to be the amino acid that limits the amount of protein the body can make. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Mutual supplementation. So how do you, if you're a vegetarian, if you're a vegan, which we'll talk about towards the end of the chapter, it's really important, you need to plan your diet so that you make sure that you're getting enough of each of the 9 essential amino acids. And so mutual supplementation, this is using 2 or more incomplete proteins together to make a complete protein. Okay, complementary proteins, these are 2 or more protein sources that together supply all 9 essential amino acids. Together, they make a high quality complete protein. So for example, you don't want to just eat rice. You want to have rice and beans, and on the next slide, I'll tell you why. Okay, so here we go. So let's start with rice. So grains like wheat, rice, oats, and corn, okay? These are going to be considered to be low quality proteins because they're incomplete. The primary limiting amino acid is going to be lysine, okay? This is the primary one. Can you complement this? Yes. So eating foods, eating like legumes, so, kidney beans, black beans, navy beans with rice. Beans lack methionine, that's the primary limiting amino acid, but they do have lysine. And rice lacks lysine, but does have methionine, adequate amounts. And so you can see how you're complementing, right? Mutual supplementation. One makes up for the other. Okay, so again, especially in individuals who don't eat meat or have very limited meat, dairy, eggs, fish, this is really, really important. So I'll just show you another slide here. Corn and beans, or corn or any type of other grain. Okay, having them with beans. Again, what's lacking in the bean can be found in the corn. So you can see where they overlap is where they share amino acids. But again, grains, corn are lacking in some. And again, beans, other legumes are lacking in some as well. And so they're going to complement each other. Here's another example. Okay, here's that rice and beans, right? So red beans and rice and minestrone soup, chickpeas and couscous, hummus. These would complement each other. And you can see the limiting amino acid as well. So in legumes, it's methionine and cysteine. In grains, it's lysine. In vegetables, it's lysine, methionine, and cytidine. And then in nuts and seeds, it's lysine and isoleucine. So again, there are going to be essential amino acids that are going to be in limiting amounts in incomplete plant proteins. And so again, combining complementary foods will help you, or will help an individual make sure that they're getting all 9 essential amino acids. Okay, and that is the end of part 1.